So today is the last Sunday of the season of Eastertide, those 50 days that come starting on Easter Sunday morning. And throughout this season of Eastertide, we've been taking time to look at not so much the stories from the Gospel, the ways in which people experience the risen Christ, but instead to look at Psalms of Easter, Psalms of new life, Psalms that we share with our Jewish brothers and sisters, not specifically about Jesus by any means, but more about the ways that God comes to us to offer that new life. Today I invite us to consider the last in that series of those Psalms, Psalm number 84. It is a pilgrimage psalm. We've used some pilgrimage psalms of late as well. They were songs that were composed by someone we don't know, by people we don't know, to accompany the journey, literally. Because people would go from Galilee way up north, or Judea way down south, or over by the Mediterranean Sea, all the way to Jerusalem, at least once in their lives. Oftentimes, sometimes every year. And as they would go, they would make pilgrimage, and they would do it not alone, but in a group of people. But any of you who have ever hiked or walked any great distance, you know that sometimes songs can help you along the way. At least they do for me. Well, these pilgrimage songs were designed to do just that, to remind people that God was present with them every step of the way. Regardless of the mountains they had to climb or the valleys they went through, God would be present with them. And the psalm today is one such song. Would have been sung by people as they went up to Jerusalem, also known as Mount Zion, and entered into the temple to celebrate God's presence in their lives. But this psalm in particular, and it's the one that is being used around Christian churches all over this world today, it talks about something that I think pertains also to this day. Because it talks not only about the pilgrims and about what God does for them, but also what the pilgrims do for others. In the passage that Ed's going to read, it closes with an image of the pilgrims going through the valley of Baca. Now that I said to Ed, who is a native of New Mexico, in northern New Mexico, we know about Bacas. Well, but the reality is, with the Valley of Baca as used in this setting, nobody knows where it is, somewhere in that Mediterranean area. But since it was in the Mediterranean area, it was a very dry place, had to be. But as they go through the Valley of Baca, they make streams in the desert. Just that one little line out of this psalm. It's not all up to God, it's up to us as well. So I invite us to share this psalm, as Ed reads it, but then to begin to sing our way through another song, a contemporary song about such streams in the desert. And in between, three members of our congregation, Diane Holbrook, Pam Hyde, Katie Buttram, will offer their reflections on the people in their lives who have been their streams in the desert, who have lived lives of living water, and who have offered that life through that living water to others. So let our hearts and our lives be open to the reading, hearing, exploring, and understanding of this ancient word and these new reflections.
A psalm to the Hebrews. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts. My soul longs, indeed it faints, for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh sing for joy to the living God. Even the sparrow finds a home, and a swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young at your altars, O Lord of hosts, my Lord and my God. Happy are those who live in your house, ever singing your praise. Happy are those whose strengths are in you, in whose heart are the highways to Zion. As they go through the valley of Baca, they make it a place of springs. The early rain also covers it with pools. They go from strength to strength. The God of gods will be seen in Zion. The word of God, the word of life.
When Talitha asked me if I would like to give a reflection on someone who had inspired and shepherded me, I thought, oh, I'm too busy. I've got all this stuff going on. Who can I think back that would stand out of all the people that I've known? And then as the day progressed, it came to me that there were 3 women who were very important to me at a time of my life. I was part of a group of 4, and we inspired and shepherded each other. So I replied and asked, or said, I don't have 1, but I have 3. Is that okay? And she said, oh, I like the idea of the Holy Trinity. So that's where the Holy Trinity came from. As I said, we were 4 women living in a small town in Montana in the 80s. And we were all seeking spiritual growth. And we met every Monday night at Donna's house for tea. We each had 20 minutes to talk about anything we wanted to, and there were no questions or feedback unless we asked for it. And then we prayed together at the end. It was a group that there were 3 Episcopalians and 1 lapsed Catholic, 1 widow, 2 divorced women, and 1 married. And each of us had 2 or 3 children, one of which had a problem with growing up in those days. It might have been drugs or alcohol, inappropriate sexual activity, truancy, learning disabilities, many things. So who were they? Who were these women? First was Anne. She had been divorced twice. She had put her first husband through law school, and then he had discarded her. And they had 3 children, which she ended up with. And she married another man who was a friend that she had known in high school and thought this would be really the solution to her problems. But he turned out to be very controlling and not physically abusive, but abusive in other ways. And when I met her, she was just gathering the courage, even though they'd been separated, to go ahead with a divorce. And she had a contemplative nature. And while I knew her, she joined the Third Order of St. Francis. Now, for those of you who may not know about the orders of St. Francis, there are monks and nuns, and then the third order is made up of people who are lay people like you or like me, who follow the teachings of St. Francis and lead a contemplative life. And that was okay for her for a while. And then she started sitting with Buddhist friends and had an idea that she would like to go to a Buddhist retreat at a monastery in Mount Shasta, California. But she asked us, do you think I'll go to hell if I become a Buddhist? And we said, no, you've got to go for it. Everyone is on a different path. We're all trying to get to the mountaintop, and there are many paths, and you need to find the one that's best for you. She is still a Buddhist, living in Montana in a different town. Then there's Donna. And she was, before I knew her, she'd been married to a dentist, very successful. They had a beautiful home in a neighboring town. And for some reason, she took their 2 children and went to Chicago to work in a co-op or something. I don't remember exactly what, helping the poor people in Chicago. Well, by the time I met her, she was back in this small town and very active in peace and justice issues. And this was the 80s, and Daniel Ortega was trying to help lead the Sandinistas to get rid of the dictator Somoza in Nicaragua. And we had Central American refugees. The sanctuary movement was going strong. But the thing that she was involved in, that I got involved in, was something called the White Train that came through our city. We were on the railroad line. The White Train was an unscheduled train, and it carried from a factory in Texas either rocket engines or nuclear warheads heading for Poulsbo, Washington, where the Trident submarine was located. And we would get a call in the middle of night. Somebody had seen the train pass by in another town. Oh, the train's on its way. We don't know how long it'll take. It stops and starts. So we would gather by the railroad tracks and have a vigil, a peace vigil. Now, Donna, these vigils were all very meticulously organized so that nothing unlucky would happen. And Donna was prepared to do civil disobedience, which she did. She sat on the tracks and she was arrested, but she was really disappointed because she didn't get to spend the night in jail. She's married again to a very nice man and has returned to the Catholic Church. She started back when they started allowing women more participation. And the third person was Judy. She had moved to this small town with her husband from California, and he was a really good-looking guy and very charismatic. But it turned out that he could build beautiful homes, but he just was very irresponsible as far as finances were concerned. He'd already been bankrupt once in California, and the same thing happened again in Montana. So she was involved in a very messy divorce, and here she was with no resources and no training. She actually lived with me the first year she was divorced. And she went back to school to the local junior college. And after I moved away, she finished at University of Montana, and she got her master's in social work at Eastern Washington University. And now she's an Episcopal priest with a small church of her own and co-leading a campus ministry. These were my Holy Trinity. They weren't perfect, and as you can see, they made bad decisions off and on, but we supported each other, and they were very important to me. It's appropriate that I talk about them on Mother's Day because there's another word that I would like to use to describe them, and it's a Spanish word. They were my comadres.
Grace McVeigh Sills was her name, but she became known around the country as Amazing Grace. She was an author and an academician at Ohio State University and an educator. She was a gifted speaker and an amazing stateswoman. She sort of became known as the grande dame of psychiatric nursing because she started in the field before there was really such a specialty. Her degree was actually in sociology, however, and she started her work in mental health as a very young professional working in the Dayton State Hospital in Ohio, where she tells the story about seeing folks there who had no hope. There was no treatment. There was just a place to put people. She remembers when Thorazine, the first antipsychotic medication, was introduced and the miracle that created for many, many people. And then very soon thereafter, the devastation of the side effects of that medication became known, and I think that led her to become a champion for community-based mental health services throughout her career. I never heard her say a word bad about anybody, although I know she had some people that she liked less than others. But she did, and I watched her take on funders, politicians, powerful people, when she didn't think they were doing the right thing for people or for communities. So she was a role model in that way. I saw her often give her gift of presence by sitting with a consumer of mental health services or a family member or a student or a policymaker, all trying to grapple with some policy issue. And before you know it, in that quiet way that she had, she would bring them together to have a common approach to solving a problem. I actually was gifted that gift of her presence many times, but once in particular that I remember when I was going through a particularly difficult time, and she took me to dinner, and then after dinner we just went to a park and sat in the car and just talked, and she mostly just listened. But she was an amazing gift, and she's kind of known for her gift of presence. She was wise and smart, but she had a really gentle air, and she had just a streak of playfulness that would come out once in a while. She taught a lot of us who were mentors of hers to be very bold in trying to do things that we were trying to do to make change. And she taught us, frankly, to be a little uncomfortable in those changes. Although she did teach me to wear comfortable shoes. That's one of the things I can attribute to her. I'm going to tell you a story about how she helped us see things a little differently. We were in the mid-1980s developing some of the first services where we'd get people out of offices and out into the streets, into the homes, actually working hands-on with people. It's called case management. But we pulled together all the professionals in Ohio who was doing this for the first such statewide conference, and Grace was our speaker. And at one point during that speech, she said, just remember, nobody wants to be a case, and nobody wants to be managed. So she had turns of phrases like that in ways that we remembered, and it helped us remember to pay attention to the people and their lives, much more than what we were doing. She also told a story that became very famous for Grace. She was talking in a conference of a lot of people, again, she did a lot of speaking, and she said she and her sister were at one point sitting one afternoon watching the kids play outside, and as kids will do, they kind of got into it with each other. And she said to her sister, well, shouldn't we go out there and do something? And her sister said, Grace, you got to understand the difference between an ant and an elephant, and that is an ant. So her ant and elephant story was famous. But she also was very caring. She, in her 70s, Grace had a mentor of her own who was in her 90s at that point, who had a bucket list issue. She wanted to go gambling. So Grace took her 90-year-old mentor and went to Reno for a weekend. And her 90-year-old friend got tired about midnight and went up to the room. I would have conked out long before then. Grace had a few quarters left, so she decided, I'll just play these few quarters before I go to bed. She did, and she won the jackpot. She won a lot of money, and here's what she did with that money. The first thing she did was endow a chair at Ohio State University in psychiatric nursing. The second thing she did was, for about a year or two, she took her granddaughter and a friend of her granddaughter's to a number of trips that those kids would have never gotten to do had they not had the money to do that. And thirdly, a couple of years later, she took the rest of the money and gave it to her daughter to get her daughter and her two grandkids out of the house because there was domestic violence in the house, and her daughter didn't have enough money to do that on her own. So she never talked much about the money, but I talked with her at once about what she did with it, and it was a very good example of her caring nature. Grace unfortunately died 5 weeks ago today, just 2 weeks shy of her 90th birthday. She was a mentor for me and many, many people. She was a colleague, she was a friend, and I will miss her.
Who has been a stream in the desert for you? That's the question Talitha asked me to think about and respond to in my talk today. And as much as I hate to be cliche, and no matter how hard and how long I thought about it, I kept circling back to Mom. I suppose part of the reason why my mom is the one I keep circling back to is because my identity was so wrapped up in hers for so long. I am the fourth child in my family, baby Kate, and I think my mom held on to me as a baby a little bit longer. My mom didn't let me cry it out, and she held me whenever I wanted, and when I got too big to be held, she held my hand. She loves to tell the story of me as a 5-year-old sitting in the back seat of the car and her in the front passenger seat with her arm wrenched between the door and her seat, reaching way back so she could hold my hand, when I finally said, Mom, I think it's time for us to stop holding hands. I'm big enough now. She says she gave my hand one final squeeze and let go, and tears filled her eyes. Yes, as a child, and now as a mother, I know it takes a long time to disconnect your own identity from your mother. Most of my early childhood memories are about me with my mom. She was always with me. And long before attachment parenting was researched and validated, that's what she did. In fact, when I had newborn babies, whenever I called her for advice, she would say, "Just think about what a mother monkey would do." And do that. I realize now how much that attachment to her has done for me in my life. Knowing she would always be there and be comfort, that's something I still hold on to today when times get tough. My mom told lots and lots of true stories to me when I was a kid. She comes from a long line of storytellers. In fact, if you ask my dad, he'll say, whatever she says, divide that by 4, and that's the truth. When we visit her today, she always lays with my 2 sons, Dawson and Sam, and puts them to sleep with her true stories. One that I remember best is when she was in elementary school, and there was one overweight kid in her class, and his name was John Peter Carrington. And she tells about how at recess one day, her and her friends were skipping around the playground singing, "Fatty, fatty, 2x4, can't get through the kitchen door," over and over to John Peter Carrington. And they laughed and they laughed. Well, the teacher rang the bell, the old-fashioned one, and they all lined up and went back to their classroom. And when they got there, the teacher realized that they had left the ball out on the playground, so she asked my mom to run and get it. And my mom says she opened the door to go outside, and there, sitting on the steps of the school, was John Peter Carrington, with his knees up to close to his chest and his arm wrapped around himself, rocking back and forth. And when she walked by, he had one tear rolling down his cheek. And from that day forward, she says, she realized how much words can hurt, and she never made fun of John Peter Carrington again. My mom, she was human too. She let me know that through her stories. And her humanity really shone through during my teenage years. This is the time my mom shortened her stories to taglines. We had no patience for stories anymore. For example, very often, out of the blue, she would look me straight in the eyes and say, "Katie, you get to be who you are." And if we had a big cleaning project, I'm from North Dakota, so we wash walls and ceilings, my sister and I, she would tell us, "Just start in a corner." And she still says that to me today when I'm overwhelmed. And when we were mad at her because she wouldn't let us buy a brand new prom dress, and she never let us watch Miss America pageant on TV, she would say, "Someday you'll understand." I think, like a lot of people draw from Scripture, I have over the years drawn from my mom's stories and her taglines. I can draw from them when I need them, and I can draw from the feeling of love and comfort my mom has always given me. My mom says that everybody has their story. Being let in on her story is probably the greatest gift she's given me. She connects the dots of her life looking back, and watching her do that over the years gives me a great picture of her humanity and of her divinity. I can be perfect in someone's eyes and know deep down that I'm not. And I can love myself for all the things I am and for all the ways I am not. I can love myself because of and in spite of who I am. It's all very complicated and very beautiful. Someday I'll understand.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Katie, for sharing the lives of Living Streams and the ways you have blessed our lives as well. Thank you.